I actually thought a little bit about what I could actually present to you, being this the Usability Day. So I'll just introduce myself. My personal journey is a bit strange, or not that strange at all. I started doing engineering. I was a computer scientist, and I started working in '94 on internet. And for the next 10 years, I basically did web development, and that was basically my background. For some reason, I felt that actually something else was missing, because the products that we were creating, although very interesting at the time, were still failing to match the user needs and perceptions. So at some point during the beginning of the 2000s, with some Portuguese friends, we created a Portuguese Usability Association, and it's officially when I started working on usability. But so many things have actually changed in the meantime. So this is actually what I used to do in Portugal. I was actually head of quality and user experience for Portugal Telecom. And then later on, I joined Vodafone in Düsseldorf in a project called 360, which was a retumbant catastrophe, let's put it this way. Thankfully, I was not working on user experience with it, so probably that was the reason. More lately, actually, I've been doing a very interesting project called Join, and this is actually what I hope and what the team actually hopes to be the next generation of mobile services from all the operators. It's actually a revamp of the SMS service. It's actually to rethink some of the core services for mobile communications, and this is done both by the operators and by the mobile manufacturers. So maybe if you want to dig a little bit, just search on the Join Us, which is a website that actually explains basically that. The reason that I'm not going to talk explicitly about usability is that actually it's so much easier for you to learn usability these days. When we started back in some years ago, actually it was very hard. There was not a lot of things. We actually had to learn a lot by ourselves. The tools were very expensive. There was not that many tools. I remember the first time that I saw an eye tracker, I was just like amazed with its price. But the thing is actually, we live in the future, and most of us actually don't understand that. The complexity around us actually exponentially has grown. So a lot of people and a lot of the problems that we actually face today in user experience and usability are much bigger than the ones we faced 2 years ago. Just think about it. I mean, I actually took this picture while I was actually flying to London, and that is actually the Shard, which is a new building in London that goes above the clouds. This is just an image that actually, at my mind, it captured my idea that we actually live in the future. We just sometimes forget about it. So yeah, so just think about it. I mean, what actually are surrounded to us is actually much more complex than it used to be. In the beginning, companies, just for you to understand where usability has changed so much, in the beginning we had products, and usability on one single product, it's so much easier to do. You think about all the product specifics, the product restrictions, the use cases. We think about the whole scenario around it, but it's just one product. But pretty soon companies discovered that products weren't enough. They needed more because everyone else was doing exactly the same product. So there was, in a sense, no differentiation between that product and the product next door. Even if it was more usable, you can fight on a feature level to say, my product is better than the other one. People would prefer one product instead of the other. Simple. But then soon enough, companies discovered that one of the advantages for us to differentiate is actually to connect products. So instead of just having one product, then we step up the game, and now you have a connected product so that you don't buy just product A, but you product A and B, and you get a totally different experience. This became quite harder because now we're actually talking about usability not on one product, not on two products, but on a combination of products. So this actually created an entirely new thing, which we call an ecosystem of products and services, where things can no longer be seen as isolated. It's not one thing, it's not two things, it's actually a mesh of things. And normally a mesh of channels, a mesh of opportunities for the users to get in touch with our products and services. So it's very hard to do usability when we don't understand exactly what the user is doing, when he's doing, and where he's doing it. So this is interesting because at the same point, we call this an experience. And experience is such a big buzzword these days, but the reality is actually this is very synthetic, can be described as a progression of economic value. This is a theory, I think, from the 90s, where basically we now currently living on the experience economy, where experience is the only differentiation that people can actually add to the products to justify a premium price value. And this is interesting for us because, and I can say to you this, usability 6 years ago was very hard to preach because very few people didn't actually have the time or bandwidth to pay attention. Companies didn't need it. They were selling millions of products. They didn't need to actually sell more products. They were doing fine enough on their own without even thinking about if it was usable or not. What changed between 6 years and now, or even longer, is actually that just features don't take it there. So the margins are getting lower. They're actually seeing the increase of revenue. So everyone is paying attention to the experience around their products. Every company is now actually nominating a chief experience officer. Every company now has or starting to have a usability or an experience, customer experience department. So this is good news for us, and that's actually the message that I wanted to bring to you today. Because I think we usability practitioners need to actually step up the game and don't do just usability as we actually have been doing for the past 10 years. We need to do more than that. We actually becoming much more important in the role of the companies today than we were 6 years ago. And this is basically the message that I wanted to give to you today. So this is what I just said, sorry. If you want some examples of very successful products ecosystems, think about Google. Google was just a search engine, and then it suddenly released Gmail. And from Gmail, we have Calendar. And from Calendar, we have Chat. And from Chat, we have so much more things. It's very hard once you step into one product not to actually buy the other ones. Maybe this is a form of persuasion, I'm not sure, I think it is. But it's also the idea to actually retain you as a customer because you add more value to be part of this exclusive group. So this is a form of user experience. It's a form of usability, if you want to say it. But instead of thinking and focusing on one specific product, it's like if we surpass the need for just the usability of this specific product, which was search, and there was tons of articles on how Google search was so much more usable than Alta Vista search, which was the predecessor of Google. I'm still from that time, so I do remember these things. Think about Apple. I mean, it's a very cliche, but actually these are the companies that you see today actually dominating the market, and they're doing it because they have experience. They have usability at the core of their business. It's what they live for. And they've been doing it for 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. They've been doing it for quite some time. So they actually managed to secure their markets because they were clever enough to foresee the need and the differentiation for user experience. The Experienc Economy, I don't actually put it on these slides, seems a very new concept, but the article that actually mentions and coined the term is from 1998. So if you search for Experienc Economy, it's a very interesting article to read, and basically you understand that we are on full blown of an Experienc Economy in the sense that this is how we can actually make money these days. The good news for us, usability practitioners, is actually we have all the tools. The tools have been there, academic, non-academic, experimental, non-experimental. Everything has been around us for quite a long time. So it's tested, thoroughly tested, and we actually know how to use them. So this is the good news. We have many of the tools that we need. So the first step that actually I need you to come and join me on this journey is to think that the usage or the usability part that we normally use to focus a lot is just part of the customer journey. So a user journey actually starts much before the people actually start using our products. So it means that we as usability practitioners need to start thinking about how we communicate our products. Because a good part of the experience and a good part of the usability comes when the message that we define for that product creates the right expectations on the mind of the consumer. If I say I have the best car in the market and then you sit on the driving seat and actually you face problems because you cannot connect to the car or even turn it on, so what does that tell you as an experience? It's a broken usability experience. Okay, so we need to think a little bit more than just when actually we start using the products. When you start using your mobile app, how do you communicate it? How people can actually evaluate it before they buy in. These days, one of the things that I actually seriously dislike is actually when we buy an application on Apple Store, for instance, or on the Android market, we actually need to buy before we try. We have no easy way to basically say, I don't like this application, it's not worth it the €1 that I paid for it. So think about it. I mean, this is part of my experience. If I actually pay for something and I'm not happy about it, how do we actually deal with this? How is this incorporated into the user experience or the usability approach of it? The same thing as when we need to pay. No one likes to pay. So think about it. When you think about putting up a commercial service, usability, it's not entirely connected to the usability of the product itself, but the payment is a critical part of actually having a pleasant experience around it. So first things first, let's talk a little bit how we actually jump from our traditional usability tools to this way of thinking, how we think about the overall experience, the holistic experience, the prototypical experience of a customer journey. we start very basically, and this, what I'm actually going to deliver to you today is actually it's what I'm working on every day. It's actually what I do for a living, and actually this is my work. So, I mean, I don't have a lot of references because I did the slides at the last minute, as every Portuguese probably does. But I will actually put the references online as soon as I put the slides as well. So if you have questions, just come to me after the slide deck. So let's start from the first. Who are we actually creating products to? Who are the users of our services? I know that for you, usability experts, the question might seem too trivial, too simplistic, but believe it or not, most companies don't even know. And I say this with a real proof that actually it's true. Most companies actually have taken the step to develop what they call a customer segment, which is the closest thing that they have to give them an impression, a view of what users are using their products. But if you ask most of the companies, how many people within their own companies actually know these customer segments? How many people are designing products towards this or that customer? Less than 25% of them will tell you that they know it. This is the harsh reality. So even companies that actually spend the money to do it, they really don't know it. They're just making products and waiting to see what happens. That's how most companies actually work. And we, usability, we don't work that way. We like to have the finger of God, like to say, this is what's going to happen. This is how people actually should react to it. This is how things should work. So let's start by saying who, sorry, my notes are missing here. So who actually are we addressing? Who are making these products? What are their beliefs? What are their expectations? What are they expecting when they see our product? What problem are we actually trying to solve? The tools for this are very common. We have all the research tools that we need. Chris talked about the personas. We have ethnography research. We have observations, surveys, interviews. I mean, I keep saying that being a usability practitioner is being an observer. This is how I learn the most. You just sit and observe. You see how the people actually interact with the products. It's so much fun when we just sit in a cafe, and I just went upstairs before everyone else actually did. And I was actually trying to take coffee out of the machine, and I couldn't get it. There was this cup, and I understood that I need to press it, but there was a button that say open or closed. And say open or closed, to me, it's the lid. It's not even the coffee. So I was just like, I mean, and I'm actually trained. I'm trained to try to understand how things actually work. And I was just like, thankfully, none of you were there. So it's quite a personal broken experience. So we start by defining who, and I want to give you an example of a research that I took part as a participant. So sometimes I do this. I register as a participant on studies that other companies do to understand how they're actually doing it. So I actually joined a product research called by Philips 2 years ago, I think, where for 3 weeks I forced my wife to take pictures of all the food that we cooked, every food that we bought. We went to the market and we take pictures. She loved the whole thing because she likes photography. She was completely ecstatic about it. But what Philips actually was trying to say is actually they gathered 20 families in Germany, 20 families in Spain, and they wanted to see how we actually cooked, what was happening inside our kitchens. So think about it. They weren't there, but we were providing them eyes towards our homes. So in the end, this is the product I actually came up with. It just hit the market in October, I think. It's called a home cooker. And it's supposed to be I haven't seen it and I haven't tried it. It's supposed to be an appliance that actually cooks while you can actually take care of other things. Because they understood that most people don't cook properly because it takes time. So what can they do so that you can actually be doing something else while the food is cooking? Basically, that's it. I'm not sure if it works. Try it. But it's just to give you an idea that actually research and researching your users' behaviors became much more complex. And you need to actually think creatively. And just coming back, one of the things that they actually did is actually they set up a social platform online that we actually could actually interact with the other participants. So we had challenges, but we also could actually discuss with other people what that photo mean. So just as an idea, how you can actually not spend a lot of money, but still get a very good user research. The second aspect that is really critical is to understand exactly what we want to provide. Believe me or not, this again sounds very simple. I'm going to present you the 4 questions that I use every day. Every time that someone comes to me with a product, I ask, who is this for? The second thing that I ask them is, what does this do? What does this solve? What does it add as value? Why am I going to use it? Okay? So you need to start thinking about all of these things. The second thing is, how are we going, once you make all the research, and this is a really tricky point, because if you fail to do this jump, what happens actually, you can still define products that really are not usable or don't match the user expectations. So we need to be very careful when we start drawing conclusions. If you're uncertain of sending conclusions from the what do you want to do as a consumer, don't ask the consumers what they want to do. Observe what they want to do. Observe what they fail to do. That's probably a best rule than actually asking them. If you ask them they want the world, and then they don't like the world. So that's how things play with users. So a good question is how we deliver against those expectations, because if you expect me to do one thing and then I deliver another one, might be broken. One interesting thing that you as usability experts know is actually the context around the actions actually are very, very important. What is actually taking the user attention span? I remember when we actually started working on usability for the web, there was a very known problem, which was the banner blindness, where people actually couldn't see the buttons to log in because the buttons were just like the advertisement next to it. It was just an image, a catchy image, and people actually develop this capability of ignoring publicity. So this is how we actually educate the consumers. First we give them advertisement and then they ignore it. That's how things actually work. And then we had a huge button of a login and they couldn't use it. People were calling the call center because you couldn't log in. I mean, this is so typical. Why? Because we weren't thinking what else was on the page to actually distract them. What else is asking for their attention? And if you think about it, the web is one thing, but now we're living on the mobile world where the phone is actually on your hand, the web is actually with you, and I'm running toward the bus. So think about it. What does this actually forces your product to become more usable? Thinking about making applications. I mean, I will not tell you how many of the banks that I actually use because of moving between countries. I have more than just one bank. I will not tell you how many times I open the mobile application to only be greeted with information about new accounts. I mean, it's not what I want. When I'm on a mobile, what I really want is actually to do something with my account. I don't care if the bank actually has a new package, a new account type, whatever, just thinking about what Chris actually mentioned. This is the things that you need to think about it. What is happening around it? Think about the mother who's actually in the supermarket, trying to do something on her mobile, again, and has a kid screaming on the car, which everyone is actually looking at her. So she has one hand driving the car, one hand with the mobile phone, and she's trying to actually take things out of the shelves and still actually trying to actually care for the kid. Think about it. The context is actually quite important. So this puts an extra stress test into your own products. Think about what this means for usability, because this is the things that you actually need to consider if you want to step forward on this field. I like this image. I don't even remember exactly why I put it here, but sorry, that's me. But this is actually what Martin Neumeyer, which is actually interesting because it's a guy coming from brand and advertisement, talks about the deep design. This is the different levels that we need to work against. And when we talk about usability, a lot of people focus on the user interface, which I hated from the very beginning. That's why I call myself an experience designer, not a user interface designer, not a user experience designer. I call an experience designer because I need to look at all these stages. And I'm a computer scientist, but the best thing that I'm actually working on this field is actually I work together with people that actually come from psychology, sociology, design, and this is actually the field that I feel that we need all to be. So be very proud of it. It doesn't matter where you come from, it just matters how you think. So sorry for this, but apparently the fonts are not on this laptop. So what I want to talk about is actually how we design the whole experience, and I will show you what we do to try to come up with future services, with future products. So first and foremost, usability is not a band-aid. And I like to actually say this because that's how many people actually see usability. And today it's the World Day of Usability, or World Usability Day. But the thing is actually, I hate, because I've been preaching for usability for so many years, I hate when people think that usability is just how things actually are more usable. I hated it. And a lot of people think that usability is just how we fix the fact that the thing is not actually working. How we get into a car and actually make the button bigger so that people know how to start the car. I mean, that's not what I think usability is. And to me, usability really starts from day zero. And this means before the product exists. Those questions that I ask, I tend to ask them before we develop the product, not after. After, you're just fixing. You're making a cosmetic fix on whatever it's not working. Personally, I think that you should start much sooner than that. So getting back to the journeys, it means that before we even jump into all of this, and this is how I develop new products and services, I start thinking about all of the expectations on this customer journey. Customer journeys, you'll find a lot of information about it online, but it's my preferred tool of choice on how I actually develop services and products. The reason is actually it gives you an overview of all the things that you need to do. Let me give you some examples. These are just pulled out of the web. There's a lot of examples. I try not to give you always the same ones that everyone shows around. So I picked up this one the other day, which is an experience from Fitch, which is, I think, an experience company as well. And they actually looked at Ikea Experience, which is a cliche as well. Everyone talks about Ikea or McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever. But I mean, this is just for you to have an idea. They define the customer journey in 3 different locations: online, out of store, and in store. So 3 different spaces for one same journey. The consumer can get into any of these parts of the journey and jump from that to the other one. You can go into the store and then check out of the store and then get home and go online and really actually make the buy. Or do the other way. I mean, you need to understand that actually the customer journey, although it seems like a fixed line and a fixed set of steps, it's really completely random. And the sooner you accept the fact that it's completely random, the better. Because it is really random. I like this example, which is actually a service design concept for the library for the city of Helsinki. It's very close by. I hope that's not a problem. Normally Portugal and Spain, I think, doesn't work entirely well. This is a customer journey that I designed for the first product that I told you about, the Join Experience. And if you look at the center, you'll see a circle of all the stages that we consider as part of the consumer experience. And this is the questions that we start raising on what is happening on all those quarters. While we're actually going through that round circle, what was happening around you. The good thing about the customer journeys is actually that it gives you one thing. It gives you a tremendous powerful tool to show to companies, because this customer journey is very easily divided into the segments that the companies operate with. Companies today have been working the same way that they did for the last maybe 50 years. They have a sales department, they have a marketing department, they have a financial department, they have an IT department, maybe it's from the 70s. But the thing is actually the customer journey will tell you exactly which teams need to be actually involved in which steps of the journey. So this is a tremendous powerful tool because the companies can understand the language of what you're trying to give to them. So usability is not just what the IT team is doing, it's not just what the product development team is doing, but they start understanding that the whole experience is actually needed as a meta team, as Martin Neumeyer actually says. Everyone in the company needs to do usability, and this is actually what I want you to remember. You need to preach about usability. You need to actually go out and convince your fellow colleague from sales. You need the guy to talk to, the guy who actually answers the phone on the customer support level. He needs to understand usability. Because when the customer calls in and says he has a problem, first, it might be his fault or not. But he needs to understand that actually he's there to provide him a better experience. And that's also part of the experience itself. So think about it. I mean, you need to involve, I know that we like to actually talk about just us, usability practitioners. I believe today that we need to step up the game and involve more people around us. And the more we actually get buy-in by all these people around us, the better products we design. The customer journey is also very good for you to understand what we call the make it or break it moments. The moments where the experience is broken. Because once you start going through all those steps, awareness, engagement, usage, support, payment, etc., when you start actually thinking, if I'm a consumer, if I'm a user, what I want to put on this part, and you put a sticker, and you put this or put that, and suddenly realize, why is it so empty? Why do we have so many ideas on this circle? This means that actually we need to do something there. There's clearly too many problems or too many questions. And actually this actually highlights on a very visual way for us to work with the steps that actually we need to actually endure and actually make better. These are opportunities. It can be fixes, but it can also be opportunities. I won't tell you how many actually side projects we found just by doing a regular customer journey. How many of sales new products we actually created on top of the existing product while we were discussing how to make the product more usable. Because this actually starts giving you a highlight of other problems related, other ideas that can actually be potential businesses as well, or products or services. So it's a very good tool because it's extremely powerful. And tomorrow, this is actually one of the main tools that I'm going to present on the workshop. So I like this usability thing. So I will this is completely inspired. I was actually preparing the presentation and I came across a book from John Maeda, which is called The Laws of Simplicity, it's a book that I seriously recommend you to read. First and foremost, because for us usability experts, it really makes us think about what it means to be simple. It's much more complex than actually that is. I normally even say this, and I've been preaching to my company, that simplicity is the new complexity. It's so hard to make things simple because no one is ever satisfied. And simplicity is something very intangible. It depends from you to me and to anyone else. So I'll give you my 10 great laws of experience. I hope you like the great. So experiences need to be simple, and this is basically why I'm telling you about this book. Whatever experience that we make today, we need to remember that actually we're dealing with a lot of things around us. The world is chaotic by nature. Everything is so random that if we make things simpler, the chances that we make them right, the better. Simplicity doesn't mean that it's actually limiting, and I need to actually remember you this. A lot of people in usability, like you were saying about the price of the flights to New Zealand, was it New Zealand, right? It's actually very interesting because it's exactly that. It means that sometimes we need to be simple in the way that we want to do it, but we shouldn't be limiting ourselves to what we can actually deploy out of it. So this is why I like simple but generative, in a sense that it's simple, but it generates a lot around it. Even if it's an emotional connection, a persuasion idea, like Chris was saying, it's simple, but yet it's more powerful than that. So you understand, I mean, simplicity doesn't mean that it's very basic. We don't want to make our users more idiotic or more stupid than they are. People are not stupid. They will understand if you're treating them stupidly. And today, more than ever, consumers are in control and are so much more smart than they were before. I'm closing. Thank you. So it needs to be repeatable. A good part of the experience is actually to make it repeatable. Think about this. If you actually go to the same supermarket twice, and actually you have two different experiences because one is very good but the next one is not so good, you understand that the first time was random. It just happened by chance. A good experience is not random. It happens by design. It happens the same way or so the same way most of the times. Again, people is random, so you need to think that people will not follow the pre-designed journey. But think about it. What could happen on each one of these stages? How can we actually put some barriers to avoid him to go overboard? So repeatable but not boring. Facilitates. An app needs to add value. What are we doing to actually do? Why are we putting another product in the market? It's just because we want to become rich? Or actually we're trying to sort something out. We're trying to save time, save money, solve a problem. So the idea that a good experience normally brings a context around it and a value attached to it. It facilitates something. Think about it. When you put a web form, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to facilitate something? A few years ago, it was very common to find a 30-page registration form where you had to give your firstborn son a kidney and probably your mortgage from the house to actually just register for the service. You haven't even seen the service, but you're already giving away a big part of your life. A good experience will actually teach you something. People love to learn. Think about it. How can you actually make, and again, thinking about gamification, maybe on one of the banks, but people actually like to learn things. Learning is a game. We learn since we were born. So if you can think about your experience actually teaching something to the people, if the user interface actually teaches something about the user interface itself, it might actually look like a form which is actually just a side note giving a bit more of content next to it. It teaches something to the user. The next time that you look into that specific type of form type or formula type, he knows actually what is demanded. Explain things. Don't be afraid of actually explaining. People don't take explanations for stupidity. Different. Think different. You remember Apple, right? Think different. These days they're thinking very similar to each other. But anyway, different but still familiar. Remember, I like the Pareto rule where you have 80% of the time people are actually not using your product. They're using someone else's product. So if you reinvent entirely the wheel, the chances are that people actually don't recognize it as a wheel. They will think that actually operates something else. The best example that I remember was actually a few years ago. There was a fashion that actually everyone wanted Flash websites. Flash websites were super cool because they could allow you to do anything. But the problem is actually people didn't even know how to navigate through them because every one of them had a different navigation system. No one actually followed any patterns about navigation. So different, familiar means refer to the patterns. There's so many information on this online. Don't reinvent things. Follow patterns, follow learnings. Intelligent, again, the idea that actually you need to add value to the context where people actually in, right? If I'm running towards the bus, what do I actually need from my app to do? I'll give you one example. I had one application that actually give me the time schedule for the buses, And again, every time that I opened the application, it brought me to the screen completely different. When I'm actually running, I want to find out if it's that bus that is coming from the right or the one from the left that is taking me somewhere. I don't have time to go through your user interface. Think about it. Human, because we're all here today, because we have humor at the center of our thinking. Think about human. How can you make things more human? Is it because we add more value to the conversational part of the description of a page? A few years ago, I actually wrote a presentation which was conversational design patterns, which actually then I changed the name for social design patterns. But it's this idea that applications, user interfaces should talk to the user. It's a very simple exercise. Look at your web page or your form, whatever you're actually working on, and start talking it. Start going from line to line what the text actually means. It's like doing a revision of a text. If one line doesn't glue to the next one, if one question doesn't glue to the next one, then you have a problem. So think about it. Make it human. Why not? It's also have to do with the tone of the language that we use. Think if it's the right one. Some countries, for instance, in Portugal, it's very common that you refer to your users on the second person, and in Germany, it's always a formal person. So it's things change, context aware. So not everyone is the same. So think about it. Experiences need to be secure. Believe me or not, it's interesting that you actually mentioned that because everyone trusts the banks, right? So they expect the application to be trustful. But at the same time, they have the same application next to it, which they don't expect to be trustful. So how can we actually transfer these trustful values to the application itself? It's a usability problem. I put this example because I think it's very close to you. I think it might be Swedish, I'm not sure. But the thing is, actually, this is super interesting because it's a helmet which apparently was just designed. Two girls actually sit up and say, we hate helmets, they're not fashionable. So they actually come up with a very innovative concept to actually use an invisible helmet 50, maybe 60 years after actually they invented the first helmets. This is completely new thinking, but they were thinking, how can we make the experience more secure and still become fashionable? So this is how you actually make things think. It's a very design approach, but think about it for your usability problems that you're facing today. And then remember that actually journeys are permanently incomplete. Don't try to actually be God. Don't try to actually be a dictator of how people actually use your interface. One of the things that I hate is actually people force me to go through predetermined sets. What if I want to be a bit more random? What if I want to navigate in a different way? Allow for exploration, allow for experimentation, but do it in a safe environment so that people, if they actually make the wrong button, they can still go back and the history is there. It was very common a few years ago that actually you press some button and you lose the entire form before. Think about it. I mean, all these things come down to usability problems again. So permanently incomplete, and yet something else that is missing on this slide. Sorry. It's very funny that you mentioned this, because for a long time I've been saying that a good experience is something that we want to share with people around us. So a good experience normally brings a good story. If I actually have a very good moment or a very bad moment, that's the moments that I actually will tell to the next person, which you as usability persons want actually to happen, because you want your products and your interfaces to sell and to be more famous. So then make it a good story. Make sure that people understand what you're trying to do, understand how you do it. And this sometimes has to do also how you present something that you did. Make a use case out of it. Show it off. People need to understand all the thinking that went into that simple form. Simple things are very hard to achieve. So make it a good story. People eventually will actually have a good experience and they will talk about it. So this one is a free one. So it's not just the 10th grade. I actually created the 11th grade experience. Surprise people. We've been talking a lot for the past, I think, 2 years on playfulness, on how things should be more playful, how things should be more like a game. But this is really true. I mean, surprise people. A few years ago when I were at Portugal Telecom, we had this crazy idea that every time that the user hit the website and got a non-existing page, instead of getting at a 404 page, we should have actually presented it with a game, saying, you know what, we couldn't find the page that we wanted, but we have something else. Just in case, think about it. I mean, think how your interfaces react to errors. What do you say to them? Like, no? Or like the Germans say, nein? Think about it. What can we do more? People will make mistakes. Surprise them in a positive way, but always in an unexpected way. So make it random, so that not always by making the same mistake, people get the same thing. Otherwise, it becomes boring and loses the effect. And that was it. Thank you, which is obrigado in Portuguese.